Hi, Dan.
Hi, Dan.
Hi, Dan. Um, you're in Davis in your wonderful house across the street from the park,
Exactly.
and it's holidays are coming in, so everybody's drinking eggnog and not paying attention to emails.
Probably that's about right.
How are you? Good
Except
health?
for you. Except for you.
Yeah, I'm emailing you. Some people retire. I don't have any plans on it, but I'm 60 years old now, and you're 70, right?
More than that.
You're 71.
A little bit more than that.
You told me you were 70 like last year. You were lying to me?
Um, I must have meant around 70.
Okay. All right. Well, we're not going to get very specific there. I met you well, I think I was riding in your car or in your VPSI van pool in 1992, I think. I think you started at the ITS Davis. You're the founding member. So you were starting ITS Davis in 1991, and you were driving your Ford Thunderbird down from the hills near El Cerrito and Berkeley to catch the VPSI van pool out to Davis. And then you wrote the book Future Drive, where you talked about neighbor electric vehicles of all things. And then you told me that you had a teacher at Berkeley, Bill Garrison, who actually talked about neighbor electric vehicles. And that you had a classmate named Larry Burns, who went on to become quite the technical guy at General Motors and now a big autonomous vehicle advocate, I believe. I've never met Larry.
All of that. Very good memory. You've got it.
So I actually went on the ITS Davis website and looked at all of your programs. I'm not going to ask you about them all, but there's 15 of them. Um, Three Revolutions, Future Mobility, National Center for Sustainable Transportation, the Policy Institute for Energy, Environment, and Economy. Then we go to Electric Vehicle Research Center, Bicycling Plus Research Center, Energy and Efficiency Infrastructure or Institute, Energy Futures. And then we get into Transit Research Center, Sustainable Freight, Road Ecology Center, University of California Pavement Research Center, Mobility Science, Automation, and Inclusion Center. And then you go around the world now, emitting carbon, but lose a battle, win a war. China Center for Energy and Transportation, India Zero Emission Vehicle ZEV Research Center, and European Transport and Energy Research Center. Did I miss one?
Yes, you did, as a matter of fact.
What did I miss?
We have a new land use and vehicle. Uh, I don't think we're calling it a center program.
Land use and vehicle.
We have actually a clever, I think we have a clever name, uh, acronym for it, but I forgot it already.
It's that clever, isn't it? Well, I know. So when did you start Free Revolutions? That was like 10 years ago, maybe?
Well, it was published 2018.
Okay.
It started probably 3, 4 years ago, 3, 4 years before that.
But for the bulk of your time at ITS Davis, a lot of it was on clean fuels, right?
Right.
And then, so clean fuels. And then when did you start on the California Air Resources Board?
2007.
And that was long after they'd already
So
done
16 years.
16 years, and you've just passed the baton there, right?
Yep.
Susan Shaheen has caught it.
Yep.
She's got a very different background than you, but a lot of shared mobility.
That's right. That's what we have in common.
Now, okay, so three revolution, and then you wrote the book 2 billion cars because you knew that we're just getting more and more cars on the planet, and the United States has what 280 million, 300 million of them, but India, China, all these other countries are just carring up, right?
That's what's happening.
And then
Actually, in China, it's not happening as fast as we thought it would.
you know,
Interestingly.
let me just digress for 1 second. I was asked to do a TED talk in 1993. It was the original TED series. I flew to Kobe, Japan. I got on stage talking about my first little vehicle. And then sitting right next to me was Richard Rogers, who just passed away, but he was an architect that did the Pompidou Center in Paris, and he did the Lloyd's of London building in London, and a great man, a great architect. And I got to know him a bit, but he went on stage after me and he says, we were called by Shanghai, by the Chinese government, to do all the planning. It looks like an island, but it was all this infill inside of Shanghai around the river. And they were designing all of this. And he said, we imagined all these bicycles coming down these streets by the cafes, and there'd be a little breeze from all the bicycles. And he thought it'd be so wonderful. And then the Chinese government said, what? We don't want bicycles. We want automobiles. So, and then he said that on stage, and he goes, I like Dan's little vehicles. Um, anyways, so basically, I think we've covered the basics. Your bio's online and stuff like that, and there's no real huge ambition with this recording. It's just to catch up with you. It's been a long time, and then just to you deal with so many different people than I do. I don't think we have much overlap in terms of people we know, other than Susan and a few others maybe. But you deal on a higher level government and now all these international governments. So I think you're pretty much an authority. Like, is there someone more than an authority than you?
There's many people that have more authority on specific topics than me, but
okay. But in terms of like in terms of environmentally friendly transportation on the planet, in terms of understanding all of what's really happening, all the metrics, all the impacts, you see all that from a big picture, right?
I probably connect more dots than most people. Let's say that.
Okay. So then we transition from that to just kind of like, I know how I have my feelings like where we're at, but I told you by text today or email, I said, like 3 or 4 years ago, everyone was telling me we have like 5 to 10 years to like really step it up and make progress here and start reducing our emissions on the transportation, because transportation is like still one of the biggest uh, where the CO2 comes from, right? Is there something more than transportation where CO2 comes from?
It's the biggest in the US and by far the biggest in California.
But around the world, it's different in different countries.
Because they haven't caught up with us with all those cars and trucks.
Right. I actually went on Google Earth a couple years ago and I looked at all these different countries and I zoomed in, and everywhere I looked was cars, automobiles. Like it's a car planet. I mean, it's just like, and
Yeah.
then and you were on the Daily Show. I've never met Jon Stewart, but there you were promoting your book. I don't know what year that was, like 2016, or when did you do 2 billion cars?
2009.
2009, a long time ago. So, but Jon Stewart, like he has the book in front of you, 2 billion cars, and he's just talking to you about fuels. I mean, there was something happening about, I don't know whether it was plug-in hybrid, I don't know what that was, but he wouldn't even really engage you on this population of cars just exploding around the planet. I mean, do you remember him asking you questions about 2 billion cars? It was just all about fuels.
Now that you bring it up, I think you're right. Now I have to go back and, look at it again. But I think you're right.
Yeah, it was just like as if the title didn't exist. If it like we had like 1 billion cars on the planet then, and you're like seeing it go towards 2 billion, and you're raising the flag of alarm. And Jon Stewart's an awesome guy, seems like it, and he was just not really engaging with really what your book was about.
Yeah, he made a joke about ethanol being like blending cocaine into cutting baking powder with cocaine.
And we don't like ethanol because it's using land for fuels instead of growing food. What are the things against ethanol? I forget.
Yeah, I think that's what he was playing off of, the idea that, you know, replacing food with fuel.
All right, now I'm going to just do another digression real quick because I'll forget it if I don't ask you right now. Denver Airport has now got plans to like double the size of the airport and add 100 gates of planes and stuff. I mean, as far as I can tell, because I've been working on sustainable mobility for over 30 years, like I don't really see a sustainable fuel that's realistic for airline travel. Like, I mean, are we able to double our airports in the next 20, 30 years and think that it's all going to go well? I know it's air travel's like what, 3% of the CO2 or something.
Well, I think the likely scenario is that they'll use biofuels for the bigger jets going long distance, they'll use for like flights under, say, 400 miles for smallish planes. Then you can use batteries or maybe fuel cells with hydrogen. But yeah, it's mostly going to be biofuels. And so the question is, they have a name for it. They call it sustainable aviation fuels.
But that's
If you,
again using land to grow fuel, not food, right?
well, they do talk about using waste biofuels like tallow and cooking fats from McDonald's, but there's not that much of it. So yes, it's going to be crops.
And but it could also be that there's not a great solution for just tons of air travel, and that we just need to like chill out and stay more regionally and build high speed rail, at least in the United States, and just have more staycations, right? Like no one wants to tell the public that, but that might be the best answer, right?
Well, remember who's that young woman from Sweden that became very famous? She promoted the idea of shaming people that fly,
Oh
and
yeah,
she went to some conference in the U.S. and or in somewhere in North America, and she went on a boat,
yeah, that was
a
Greta.
sail
Well,
instead of flying.
yeah, and I think she was having a hard time to get home, and she had to beg on the line for a ride home, and yeah, all that. All right, so in your world, whether it's ITS Davis or it's going to India, China, or Europe and all of this stuff, what is the mood in your world right now? I mean, we just had COP 28, I guess, and there's all this noise about the head guy there is an oil gasoline guy and that it's just not working right. I mean, and like I said, like 3 years ago, I was hearing like we had 5, 10 years to get off this highway, like take the exit humans, we got to change. Like what is the report card would you give us right now for everybody? Like are we making progress? Are you encouraged? Are you concerned?
Well, it's progress, but it's still pretty slow progress. If you give a positive spin to that, they, you know, two things came out of it. One or two relevant things came out of it. One is the program to cut methane, but what they're targeting is oil and gas methane, which is a small part of the total, and you're only going to get a small part of that. And there's no mandatory parts to it. So that's kind of like, it was kind of a shame because that overwhelmed, swamped all the other considerations about fossil fuels more generally. And the other part is they came up with a statement about reducing fossil fuels, but it was rather vague, and there were again no teeth in it.
But I mean, as I understand it, methane, most of the methane is coming from livestock, right? It's burps, farts, and stuff from cows. I mean,
Well, I don't know the number the most. It's a significant. There's a significant amount that comes from land, also from landfills, from agriculture, and and so there's several sources to it. None of them I don't think is more than 50%.
and then the methane, though, up in the atmosphere is more problematic than CO2. I mean, it's more harmful to the greenhouse effect.
As if you compare molecule to molecule, but there's a lot more CO2 than methane. So CO2 accounts for something close to 2/3 of the global warming effect. And methane is part of the other 1/3. There's all these other substances, refrigerants that also have an effect. So methane is, a much smaller number, and it doesn't last very long in the atmosphere.
Oh, no.
So,
Yeah.
it only lasts, 10, 20 years. Most of it breaks down by that time, whereas carbon dioxide lasts for hundreds of years.
Uh, yeah, such a problem. So, and just to digress again real quickly, so I'll forget it. Um, you know, the average, at least in the United States and probably around the world, most people don't know if they've ever carried a gallon of gas, like down to the speedboat or something, or a gas can. I mean, a gallon of gas weighs 6 pounds liquid, but when it burns through your engine, internal combustion engine, it comes out and you can't see it because it's CO2, it's invisible to you, but the CO2 weighs 20 pounds. So every gallon of gas goes from 6 pounds to an invisible 20 pounds of CO2. I think I'm accurate, right?
Exactly right.
Well, most people don't know that, and it's probably a good thing for people to know it. All right. So, oh, and I was going to also digress again and say there is sort of a success story in our past, which is the CFC ozone stuff, because we had problems 20 years ago with what our refrigerators and stuff, and they were creating, I don't know the science like you do, but like we had dirtier cities and we had an ozone problem. There was an ozone hole over the planet, but like industry, government, like just attacked it and like pretty fast. That was kind of solved, wasn't it?
Yeah, that's probably the biggest international success story that exists. They really did, get rid of almost all of those CFCs. They have, there's still other derivatives that are used, of course, because we still like our air conditioners and our refrigerators, but there's much less leakage. They use a substance that's far less, you know, effect, you know, far less effective as a greenhouse gas.
So switching to, we have a politician, AOC, she goes by Alexandria, and she's young. I don't know how she got so smart at a young age, but she said a couple years ago, she says, I know the Americans will be able to respond to this climate crisis because we got through the depression. And I was like, time out. Like, if you have like a third of Americans that are starving today and they need to solve that problem, that's very different, isn't it, than like being on the highway and have to get off the highway because you're going to crash in 20 years? Like, isn't it a really different problem from having an immediate pain to trying to get our society to change our behavior and to become carbon, reduce our impacts down the road? Because if we miss it up, it's going to be this delay, and then all of a sudden things are going to get really ugly for future life.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's essentially a permanent impact, and it affects everyone and the whole globe.
So what do you
All
think,
it's
if let's just say we just stay on our track and we just do like we're doing and we just don't make huge progress and the targets that, so I know California Air Resources Board wants all the cars sold in California to be zero emissions by 2035, right?
correct.
And there's more countries and cities doing that, states and things like that. And then right now, at this moment, we've had Tesla come out, become popular. I just heard there's going to be like 90 models of electric cars on the market in the United States. But right now, they don't seem to be selling that well. It's like the early adopters all bought Teslas. And now this next wave of customers are like, I don't know, where do I charge it? I don't know if I want to do that. And we're seeing some hybrids come back in sales. But like, if we don't get this right, what do you think the world looks like in 50 years?
It's going to look very different than today's world. At least, actually, I would modify that to say United States will do okay because we've got lots of resources, lots of money. We'll have to spend a lot more of it building seawalls and transforming our agriculture, moving we might not have as many ski lifts, or they'll be in different places. The wine regions will change. So there'll be a lot of changes, but we have so much money in the US, we'll be able to adapt. The really sad story is all those parts of the world that don't have those resources. They're going to get flooded. They're going to have famines because they can't adapt the agriculture, as species move and climate shifts and precipitation patterns change. So, I mean, but for the US, it really means spending a massive amount of money, and it'll be disruptive. But we're going to survive as a human, species in the United States.
But places, I mean, the place that comes to mind is Bangladesh. I mean, that place is going to get screwed over pretty hard, right?
Right. Well, and all those islands that are going to just disappear.
And the thing is, like Bangladesh, it's like at least the United States, from the success of capitalism and all this consumption, it's like we had a big dinner, but it's like Bangladesh is sort of getting the bill for the dinner, except they didn't get any of the good food, right?
Exactly right.
So it's not really fair.
And that's why they did at the COP meetings, they keep trying to get the rich countries to pony up money for these other countries, the global South, countries that are the ones that are getting screwed because of what the US and Europe did, for a couple centuries.
Now you were down in Honduras with the Peace Corps when you started your career in 73 to 75. Have you
That's
been there
right.
since? Have you been back?
I was back once just a few years later, but there's been a lot of challenges there. So no, I haven't been back.
And what's that going to look like 50 years from now if we don't do better? Is that going to get pretty hurt too? Are they flooding?
They won't, most of that, most of Honduras is above, quite a ways from the seashore. And so they won't have flooding from the oceans, but, precipitation patterns change. So, there could be heavier rains. Agriculture will have a problem adjusting.
I also hear that if it goes bad, which it seems to be on a path to me that's looking bad, uh, they expect wars for resources. People die in wars. Somebody said that don't tell the continent of Africa about the impacts of climate change or climate heating because it's already impacting them. I mean, they said basically every country in Africa except one has seen some sort of reduced output based on climate right now. I don't know if that tracks with your knowledge of Africa.
Well, certainly, as we were just talking about, it affects the agriculture, affects precipitation patterns. And so, it's hard. You just have a little plot of land, and to adapt is very difficult. And, if it gets dried out, drought, what do you do?
It's not good. It's not good at all. All right. So you're just encouraged. So like if you and I go down on a plane to tomorrow and we're not alive, it's gonna all get solved. We're just doing great as humans, right? Is that where you are?
No, I don't think so. Uh,
What do you talk about with all of these other smart people you hang out with? These government, I know you don't hang out with Jim Farley, CEO of Ford. There's more sort of industry versus government pushback. But with the people that you collaborate with, think about, talk about, what are your discussions about these days?
well, I try to stay in my lane, what I really know about. And what I do really know about is transportation. So there are the technology fixes, meaning switching from internal combustion engines with fossil fuels to electric vehicles with renewable electricity. That's clearly a huge, I mean, there's two big things that we have to do, two most important things to deal with climate change. Number one is convert our electricity to renewable sources, solar, wind, and some other sources. And then number two is electrification. And then there's lots more in the transportation area. If we can reduce the size of the vehicles, if we can reduce vehicle use, it'll make it all much easier and much faster. And of course, that implies land use, changes in land use and commuting behavior, and a lot more.
Yeah, and most companies I've ever interacted with, when you say behavior change, they just run for the hills. They don't. I don't know any companies that want to take on behavior change. They just like, see ya.
Well, that's why electric vehicles is appealing, because it does require some behavior change, but relatively modest. Uh,
Right, right.
they did try, back a few years ago, they did, Ford, GM, others invested, pretty massively in all of these shared transportation options. And they basically all gave up on it, except for GM with Cruise. And they're getting battered with that. But they all backed off from all of those creative initiatives they had.
Yeah, no, I get it. And I think from the automakers, I think we have like 14 or so major OEMs on the planet. Now Tesla is supposedly as of today worth 800 billion. So if Ford is worth 550 billion today, Tesla's worth 16 times more than Ford, so that's pretty interesting to see all that dynamic of in the market. But those companies like Ford, they're making these big SUVs, and you're getting what, like $5,000, $10,000 pure profit on every vehicle come off the line. And then you show up and talk about a shared service for a few bucks, or an e-bike with a profit margin of $25 or something like that. Those executives are like, what are you talking about? Like, why am I supposed to be excited about this? I mean, it's a cultural thing for those industries.
But I do want to give GM credit. They did get rid of, they had a big initiative on shared use. They did get rid of that, but they did stick with their Cruise automated vehicle. And the Cruise automated vehicle, the Origin is the name of the vehicle they developed, really was intended to be a shared use vehicle. It was designed that way. It holds 6 people, and it was intended to, transport multiple people at a time. So I do give them credit for that. They're
I,
the
I,
only one of the major OEMs that have done that.
Yeah, as of last week, I got notification that the Cruise Origin, which you're right, it was a very nice design, designed custom to the use of a shared autonomous vehicle, not just a car that's been retrofitted for it. It's a custom design. It's a very attractive, nice design, easy to walk into, comfortable seating for 6 people. It looks secure and safe, all the stuff. But as of last week, that vehicle is now shut down, and I don't know of any plans that it's coming to the world. Maybe if Cruise finds its path back to some sort of future, they'll bring it back. But at this point, they've said they've shut down the factory, I believe in Lansing, Michigan, to build it, or they've just shut it down. So unfortunately, that little baby is just sitting over there, and hopefully it'll come back. But it's I don't know, for me it's like we have so much to do, and then this whole conversation so far has been mostly about carbon emissions, and so a lot of people, as you and I know, are talk about electric automobiles, and then you've already mentioned smaller vehicles, and you were nice to write the forward in my book, and you talk about if we use more smaller vehicles around our cities, we got people working from home, they don't need the car in the same way. More of their trips may be local. So like a smart car or smaller or something, they could use that. And then they could, go to car sharing, like, I call it micro rental. You rent by the minute, by the hour. And so like in Davis, where you live, you have a little car, and then you have a station where you just go get a highway car. And it's just a very easy, I mean, the services have to exist. They don't exist this way, where it's really easy to get from your little vehicle into the big vehicle just in a minute or two. And then you go on the highway. But we just don't see much of that happening right now in terms of this more multimodal approach to smart mobility.
Well, as I've told you, and my favorite zero emission vehicle is my bicycle.
Sure. It's that is the best vehicle, but you also know in my book, I call Manhattan, thick city, a very city core has got 60-story buildings, so it's thick, like a thick book or so. And then most of suburban low density America is, I call it thin city, like a thin pizza. And my calculations say about 200 million of us live in thin city, where actually public transit really doesn't do a very good job. And I've seen a report recently out of Miami-Dade County where it said if you own a car there, you can get to 8 times more jobs than you can taking public transit. And so we don't really have alternatives to car ownership in the country that are all that viable for a lot of people. But in thin city, I don't think I think there's less than 1% riding their bicycle every day in thin city to like work or something. So really across the United States, mostly, we don't have many people riding bicycles. And even if people want to ride bicycles, they don't feel safe, or they don't want to put their life on the line, or they ride by a white bicycle, which is to show someone died today on that corner by an automobile. And so it doesn't feel like to me that we're making that much progress in that area.
Well, we're not making much progress in shifting away from what I call the car monoculture at all. And
That's
whether it's multimodality, smaller vehicles, we're not doing any of it at all. So, I mean, part of it, like with the smaller vehicles and bikes in particular, we don't invest in the infrastructure. So Davis here did start investing in infrastructure around 1970. They started doing it incrementally. and by the way, about the same time that Copenhagen also did it in Europe, and they basically just started restricting cars from certain roads. They created the bike infrastructure. When I ride around here, much of the bike paths, bike routes are on bike bridges over the arterials and the freeways, and bike tunnels under a lot of the arterials. And so they've developed it so that it is safe, and there's very little interaction. There can be very little interaction with cars. And we've created such a bike culture in Davis that even the car drivers are much more cautious and careful than anywhere else, because there's bikes all around them. They don't want to hit a bicyclist. So it's creating the culture of the drivers as well as the safety and security for the riders and the infrastructure to make it all happen.
But it's the infrastructure that is properly designed and implemented that makes it possible for the bicycle and these small vehicles to flourish, to be used often, to be used widely.
Yep.
And when I worked with you for a year in 1997 to 98, I don't know. I think Davis, there was more people riding bikes in Davis probably than almost any city. I mean, I heard really big figures of how many students rode bikes there. It's obviously a very flat, small city. It's not very large. It's not. I'm in Minneapolis today, and it just stretches for miles in every direction. It's like Phoenix, but Davis is not like that. It's a little like a petri dish of a little city, right?
A petri dish that has healthy healthy nodes, healthy bacteria.
But you still have some SUVs that are driving into downtown. They might be going slow looking for the bikers, but somebody has fired up a 5,000-pound vehicle to go a mile down to the bookstore or the cafe in downtown Davis, which is like what, 5 blocks by 6 blocks. And that vehicle could be used to go all the way to New York City if they wanted to at 80 miles an hour. To me, it's like drinking soup with a shovel. We're not doing much of this right sizing. And when I worked with you in '97, we got a couple of those Bombardier neighborhood vehicles, which I liked, and I got to use one. And I lived on the very northern edge of Davis, which isn't that far from the university, but I used that vehicle every day for almost 6 months. And I drove it around Davis. I drove to the university. I'd go to a movie theater at night. I'd go to the co-op and buy my groceries. And then once in a while, when I had to go to Sacramento or San Francisco, I had a Honda Civic waiting for me, my far car, and I would park the Bombardier and I'd take this highway car to my faraway places, and it worked great. But I would guess there's not many neighborhood vehicles driving around Davis today.
Yep, that's right. But there are now a lot of electric bikes and scooters are starting to really become a significant presence. So that's kind of where it's going, as opposed to
So the cargo bikes too are happening and things like that.
yeah, yeah.
So the other thing is you've put a lot of focus on policy, and since my book came out, you've got a copy of it. I made my book to help a lot of people, and I'm happy to have that out there. Um, I get a little more questions about policy now, like how do we create the policies for this? I'm going to call it. I remember asking you like 20 some odd years ago. I said, "What do we call this future, Dan?" And you said, "Smart mobility." And I now actually am using a term that I used for some years back. I just call it multi-mobility. So it's multimodal mobility. And there's a mobility researcher at University of Michigan. I can't remember his name, but he did a great chart. It was like looking at the CEO and then 3 vice presidents. And one of the vice presidents was transportation, physical transportation mobility. The other side was connectivity, how we virtually connect with the world. And then there was another one called proximity, which was about the physical. So they were kind of transportation, proximity, and then over here, connectivity, virtual. But the main word is what?
Multimodality.
No, I'm gonna have to give you a bad grade on that. Access. The word is
Oh,
access. It's
yeah,
all access. It's
right.
we're either physically accessing the world or we're virtually accessing the world. And now going through the pandemic and things, to me, it's like a silver lining. Tragically, so many people died with the pandemic, but the silver lining was we got so many more people to start using Zoom and do these meetings, and people are, bitching about it a bit now, and they're trying to figure out how many days in the office, how many days, what. But overall, millions and millions of people got to begin to access things without physically moving, which I think ultimately has been a good thing. Do you agree?
It's like you in Minneapolis and me in Davis.
I know. It's pretty good. It's pretty good. So, but I've got more questions about policies, like how do we do policies? And, in your world of policy, I mean, there's always people talk about carrots and whips, right? It's like, what are the incentives? What are the disincentives? And and I really think as we're talking about this issue of smaller vehicles, and we're coming back to this issue that the infrastructure is a really big part of it. And so when I do things about small vehicles, at least in the United States, I get so many people say, like, I would never drive that little vehicle. I'm going to get crushed like a bug from those SUVs out there. And then as I think about this for so many years, lately I've been walking through parking lots. I like go into a Target parking lot or Walmart or something. And what do I see there? I see just people without vehicles, a mother with children just walking down the parking lot. And these big SUVs are backing up, they're driving in, and these people with no vehicles, no protection, are interacting with these huge 5,000-pound vehicles. And it's called a parking lot, and there's kind of an expectation of how you behave in it. I'm sure they're not always safe, but it's like you've created a zone, and in that zone, there's this behavior that has to be acceptable for everyone. And it's this mixture of these different kinds of vehicles. And it's like, if we understand how to make that work in a parking lot, why can't we start looking at local transportation, more calm traffic zones, in our neighborhoods or on certain collector streets or arterial streets? Like, can't we just start thinking more about slowing down these mass vehicles in the places where they need to be slowed down? Because these vehicles are getting bigger and bigger. We've just seen the Cybertruck, an electric vehicle introduced. It's almost 7,000 pounds. 7,000 pounds in an environmental truck or something. It's like, if I had an ocean going yacht and I went into a harbor in Santa Barbara, and my 70-foot yacht's there, and I want to go get some food across the harbor, I would never fire up that big yacht. I'd get in my little dinghy. I'd get in my little boat, my little Boston whaler, to go across the harbor. So it seems like we've reached a time where we should have two categories of vehicles, ones that are higher speed for the regional, national travel, whatever, and then these new local ones. But the local ones need some infrastructure enhancements to help people feel and actually be safe. But then the point I'm trying to get to is, how can we do policies? How can we, do the carrots, unless we see that the horse likes how can we do the sticks if we don't know if the horses will like the carrots? Like, don't we need to, like, present to the public these new options of smaller vehicles in the kind of safe environments to use them, and slowing down these big vehicles? Let's people try it. And if they like it and they like switching for that bigger vehicle to go from Davis to Sacramento just once every 2 weeks, if they like that transportation bundle or that integrated mobility option service, but they also like their local vehicle, whether it's the e-bike, but now maybe it's cold some days in February, so they want the golf cart or the neighborhood vehicle, the smart car or something like that. These are small vehicles. We know that you can park almost 4 per every big car. We know in mass quantities they can cost less than $7,000 or $8,000. They could cost $5,000. We know they don't take big batteries. We also have a crisis in our country, I think, about just livability and affordability. And there's people, I go on TikTok and people are just screaming about the cost of living. And they talk about their apartments costing so much and everything, but their transportation is now, AAA says it's over $25 a day to own a car.
Well, I mean, what you're talking about requires so many changes in policy and behavior, investments. I mean, just look at our vehicles, as you were mentioning, implying a moment ago. they've just gotten bigger and bigger. If you look at an F-150 today, it's literally twice the size of what it was, 50 years ago. Honda Accord, Honda Civic, any model that's been around, you can just look at it. So, and the unfortunate thing about electric vehicles so far is they're basically just swapping out the internal combustion engine for the batteries and the motors. And so there's just as big, and that creates all kinds of problems, because now you've got those well, it's massive size and weight creates safety problems. You have these massive batteries that require so much of these critical materials, and it creates even more tensions with the rest of the world because we don't like it that China has produced most of the batteries and the materials. It just goes on, and it's expensive as well, just from a personal cost perspective as well as a societal cost. So we're going, even in the most simple way, we're going in the wrong direction. So to change, I've got lots of ideas how to deal with what I call this vehicle obesity problem, and through regulation mostly, but but carrots and sticks. It's, if we're going to really change behavior, you just have to do two things. You have to invest in the new infrastructure, and you have to use carrots and sticks.
Yeah.
But pricing is probably the most important, and it's starting to happen. We're starting to use more toll lanes, but we aren't using it as a policy tool to really change people's behavior.
Well, I will give you just a few minutes, just a couple. I'll do as fast as I can to show you how I think about carrots and sticks. So let's just think all of California is in a giant ballroom, like a giant conference ballroom. I'm looking down at all of California. Just use your imagination, and everyone's in there doing the status quo. They own the cars and trucks we know. They're doing their whole thing. And then I create a new ballroom to the right, and I call that the pink room. And I'm going to put all the new options. I'm going to put car sharing. I'm going to put little vehicles. I'm going to put e-bikes and better transit, all this stuff in the pink room, this new room. And then I'm going to open the door like I've done with my partners, and everyone's going to run into the pink room to all this great new stuff. And we open the door, and hardly anyone goes in. So then I need another room on the other side. I call it the stink room. And that's where, when I bring the stink into the main room, I start raising the prices. I start shaming people for SUV use when they don't need it. Some people are burning SUVs or whatever. And so I imagine like this couple that's in the main room, and I think of them like koala bears up in this tree, and they go, honey, do you want to go in the pink room? And they said, nah, I don't want to go. But when the stink starts coming in the main room and making the status quo uncomfortable, then the little koala bear couple says, hey, honey, you want to go in the pink room? And goes, yeah, I've been thinking about that. Let's go in the pink room. And so, but to me, you can't make that change with only two of those rooms. You can't have the better way, the pink room, and just expect people to go, because they won't change how they're doing it. And you can't just create the stink room and have politicians raise the price on everything when there's no place to migrate to a better option. So they have to all work together. And I would think before you can start pricing people out of these bad behaviors, we have to see evidence that they really like this next thing, this better way. Like once they go into this new way of doing things and they go, this is better, and I'm saving $4,000 a year, I'm saving money to put my kid in college, I'm meeting more people in the neighborhood, I'm biking more, I'm saying hello to people in the morning, our carbon emissions are going down, it's just great, great, great. Then you can start bringing that stink, those pricing controls you're talking about, because people are now know what we're talking about and they like it. It's almost like dieting. Like if I was going to sell someone some dieting pills, how would you get people to pay for the dieting pills without a picture of them looking really slim and good? Like if you don't show them what they can get from dieting, then how do we sell that?
Yep, having demonstration communities is part of it, pilot projects. But I think it's an incremental process. It's like even in Davis with the bicycles, it took decades, incrementally changing. If you look at Copenhagen, it took decades.
Right, but do we have decades to do this?
I don't, I don't think it's going to happen any other way. So
Okay, so we'll put that aside. So when I was working with you, I went down and talked to Paul McCready. You remember him? He's no longer with us. He was an amazing man who created this. He created the first, human powered aircraft that flew across the English Channel. He won $100,000 award for that. Amazing story. The bicyclist should have died.
Oh,
I mean, he just did such.
speaking of carrots and sticks, he told me once that what motivated him was that he was really desperate for money. I guess his kid had, was bankrupt or something, and he needed money, and there was this reward that came up, and so that's what motivated him to do that.
He made a plane that was a bicycle plane that was 70 feet wide, and the whole plane weighed 70 pounds. A 70-pound plane. But when I was with you, working with you, our project was called EV Local. It really didn't go anywhere. And I went down to see him. He goes, Dan, he says, well, we worked on the EV1 and we worked on e-bikes. And what you're talking about, a sub car, makes a whole lot of sense. And there's problems and figuring out the safety and all this stuff. But it makes a lot of sense. He goes, but like you cannot start a fire in a fireplace by just taking a flame right to the big log. You have to go and get the kindling and a little paper under there. You have to find the places where the flame can light now. And so I think that that's always stuck with me, that he was saying like, we can't go just, impose huge change and mobility, and all this disruption would come through industry, job loss and all this stuff. But to go to places where the kindling's right. So you've already talked about Davis. And I think I emailed you 6 months ago. I said, like, wouldn't Davis be a good place for some sort of a new showcase mobility city? And I think you responded, yeah, because it's hard, because when you go to city council in these places, Davis is doing so good with bikes, but we really need the model cities to become supermodels. We need the good places to get even better. And then we need people to be able to visit these places. And I love it that people can go to Amsterdam or to Copenhagen and see what it's like to have 40% of the mode share be bicycles. I mean, thank God that's on the planet. If I had a lot of money, I would just be paying for elected officials to go there for a week and experience it. But here we have the United States, which has got the automobile monoculture talking about that we're going the wrong way, that these vehicles, you're basically telling people it's a social justice issue now. I mean, this is a social justice issue, our dependency on these full-size, heavy cars, right?
That's right, exactly, because it's even worse because there's a relatively small percentage of the population that buys new vehicles. It's about a third of households buy almost all the new vehicles, and about 10% buy more than half. And so they tend to be richer people. And so, okay, it costs another $5,000 to get a bigger model, a bigger vehicle. Oh, what the heck? Might as well, because they've got the money. But then they pass those vehicles on to the rest of us. And so it does. And so the rest of us end up with these big, huge vehicles that are costly to maintain, costly to fuel, and basically unsafe compared to what it could be.
So it's like an arms race for these vehicles, to the point where what's the breaking point, and where are we at? And I mean, we in Colorado, where I now live, our governor Polis was going after just affordable housing, and he was going to go into these cities and sort of change how it was done, get the state more involved, because he wanted housing to cost less. And within a month, he got so much pushback from the mayors that he just dropped it. But like, well, why not transportation? Why not helping households? With so many households owning 2 or 3 cars, if we can help people get rid of a second car because the transportation options now are better, or they're better aligned, or there's better education, or there's better infrastructure. I get it that it's not a simple thing. I mean, to say a gasoline car is now an electric car, that's simple. I mean, a sixth grader can understand it. But to do system change is a messy, more complicated thing. But there's Davis that's doing better, than a lot of places. So coming back to Davis, I think the hard part for me is like, when I think about Davis as a model mobility city or a multi-mobility city, and then I think of New York City. So like in New York City, I don't know, let's say only 20% own cars in Manhattan. Maybe it's less, I don't know. But someone who wakes up in Manhattan, what's the most popular form of first and last mile in Manhattan? It's the elevator. It takes them down to the street. And then they have just walk 3 blocks and they're on a subway. So transit works pretty good. But the point I'm trying to get at is the consumer wakes up in New York City and you could show up with a new Uber service, a new Lyft service, or a new anything. And they could wake up and say, I'll try that today because I'll spend my money on the subway yesterday or today. I'll spend money on that tomorrow. But when you own a car and it's sitting in your garage and you're making those car payments and the insurance payments, like you don't get to wake up and decide to redirect your spending that day. So if we want to do a model city in like a Davis, where outside of the university and outside the students, Davis is like 100,000 residents, or is it's less than that? It's like 60,000 or something.
It's about 75, 80.
Is that with the students or without the students?
That's legal, but residents, but with students, it's probably about 90, 100.
Okay, so let's take the 75,000 living in Davis, and I have an image of Davis I can pull up here in a second if we needed to. But so 75,000 people, what are we going to guess? Like 70, 80% own a car of that resident base there?
Of the non-student population, I'm sure that's right. I'm sure it's even higher than that.
So we could be looking at 80% of 75,000 people. So now if we want to come in there with better options, you talk about Cruise, they've got the Origin already basically ready to be built, right? But these things are not being put into service in there. And what's happening is I use the metaphor of a stepping stones across a river, you know, and that metaphor is like we own a car and it's like the concrete bridge over the river. And we start it up every day. It gets us where we want to go. It's in front of our house. We drop it in front of the office. It just takes us door to door. But we only use it, what, 5% of the time. It's expensive, all that. So stepping stones were like alternatives. Like when I was with New Mobility with you in 1997, it's like, oh, we can now telecommute. Oh, we can take a van pool. Oh, we can bicycle. Oh, we can do car sharing. Oh, we can take it. We can have an e-bike. But if your stepping stones are not well aligned, you know, if one you go across the river and one stepping stone is right there and the next one's right close by, you step on that. But the next one's like 12 feet away. I can't get my feet over to that one. Like we don't align them very well, in my opinion. Like we don't align these things and we just let these companies go in and say, I'll put in shared scooters here in Santa Monica and I'll put in car sharing over here in South Bay, you know, LA. But we don't actually look at the areas where people travel in the city and say, let's get all these services aligned so people could actually get rid of that second car, something like that. But the point I'm trying to get at, to come into Davis and bring in, you know, to bring in neighborhood vehicles at a low price, to bring in better e-bikes for more people, maybe cargo bikes, whatever it's going to be. More people can afford the bicycles. I'm not going to go there, but we want more pedal bikes ultimately, right? But you could have May Mobility, you could have Waymo, which is Google Alphabet, you could have Cruise, you could have autonomous shuttles, you could have other kinds of next level van pool. There could be solutions to get people to Sacramento. When they get to Sacramento on a van, there could be a last mile shared e-bike there. We could be building these kinds of things, but ultimately these people, 80, you just told me 80% of the 75,000 probably own a car. So what would we have to do? Like take their car away for those who would participate in the program for like 2 months and park them at the fairgrounds or something? Or like, how do we get some cars out so we can get people to try the new stuff? Because I don't really see them trying the new stuff if they got cars in their driveway.
Well, go back to the idea. You got to create the choices that are good choices, and you've got to create the incentives and disincentives. I mean, even in Davis, parking downtown is free. They couldn't even get, you know, that passed. So, you know, and that's it. So I think we are talking about adding an extra lane on the freeway going to Sacramento. And, you know, one of the things that can be done there is put tolls on it. And so that'll discourage some travel a little bit, but it'll also mean that money is collected that can be used for, you know, subsidizing small vehicles or e-bikes and providing better infrastructure and parking for it. So it's a combination because you got to generate the revenue to be able to do it. And no one likes taxes, but tolls are on roads is a good way of doing it. You're internalizing those costs that cars are causing. So I think politically it's more possible to do than a lot of other things. And everyone drives. So the amount of money you can generate is massive if you do that.
So
So that's just one example. And
well,
I
no, I
think,
think I want to expand on that real quickly because just actually because I really don't know. I mean, I was in Jeanette Sadik Khan, if I say her name right. She was the transportation commissioner in New York, and I visited her with a friend, and I think it was 2008, sitting in the transportation commissioner office in New York City, and she came in the day before the New York congestion pricing had just lost, and she was in a pretty bad mood, and I think it's just passed recently. But my real question is, if you go to a toll road between from Davis to Sacramento or anywhere really, how does the toll road not impact that low income family that's already paying more for these older SUVs and stuff? How do they afford to travel? Does that mean just rich people can travel and the poor people have to stay home?
no, you create, you can do two things. One is you create good options for them. So like you have more bus service that and vans that you subsidize to carry them and provide good transportation that way at much lower cost than cars. And the other is you can use some of it to subsidize them.
Okay.
If,
So
if
some
they if they carpool, if they use smaller vehicles, if they're transit.
Okay, so this could somehow be figured out in a more equitable way that the fee the new lane on the highway, which costs money, the toll road, that it wouldn't necessarily just be a huge a barrier for someone with a lower income to access their world. It,
Right.
it, it could be sorted out. Okay.
So
Uh,
I do have to go.
yeah. That was pretty much all I wanted to talk about. I would like to see that we start a discussion around Davis to see if we can get more people to think about how Davis could be a pilot city. I think building on what you've got good there would be great. You're 15 miles from the governor's office in Sacramento. You've got a very small size city that is a manageable size. You have a population I think is very environmentally sensitive, and so anyways, but thanks for being a friend for all these years, and thanks for letting me record this. And I'll let you know if this gets shown anywhere. But anyways, I'm hoping we make more progress, and I hope that I can surprise you in a few years, and you say, "Dan, man, I never thought we'd make this much progress in 3 or 4 years." That's what I'm really hoping that I hear from you in 3 to 4 years from today.
And thanks for spreading the gospel. Your great book. Hopefully more people read it. And you've been the leader in getting these ideas out there. And I know it's
It takes all of us, and we've been doing it together. And if you hadn't like let a car designer come into your research institute like in 26 years ago, like they probably thought you were crazy. What is a car designer Dan Sturges doing here? Like I think I think the cross disciplinary part of this is really what's so important at this point, that we have to open up and get out of our silos.
and every time I see a gem car around, I always think of you.
I hope I hope it's good thoughts. All right. Well, say hi to Sandy for me. Have a great
Thanks.
holiday or Christmas or anything, Hanukkah, whatever. And anyways, thanks, Dan, for taking the
Yeah.
time tonight.
Take care.
All right. Bye-bye. Bye.